Welcome back to Step Up, where we learn from the best in business. I'm David Wolf, media producer, and now I'd like to introduce your host, speaker, psychologist, supporter of military families, and sassy grandmother, Dr. Margarita Gurry.
Well, hi, David Wolf. Thanks. Today we have with us Chuck Gallagher, who is an amazing ethicist. He's a CSP, a radio talk show, a generous guy. Recently, I was doing an article on ethics, and I called him, and he was very generous and wise with his input. Funny guy, funny speaker, and here he is. Hi, Chuck. What's up?
And I'm in Margaritaville. What a wonderful thing. I am so thrilled. Oh, maybe that wasn't ethical. I don't know, but
Oh, it's Margaritaville sounds ethical to us. I mean, it's not like that title is taken by anyone, right? We can use it.
Oh, of course not, Jimmy. Yeah, no.
Poor Jimmy Buffett. All right, we'll give him his attribution.
Well, wait a minute. Let's let poor Jimmy Buffett. Let's restate that. He is
Pobrecito. I just stole his Margaritaville. So
yeah, there we go.
There we go. So one of the things that we do on Step Up Podcast is we get wisdom from the best of the best in business, and you, sir, are the best. So talk to us. You have one of the most interesting stories I've ever heard. Tell us about your route to becoming not only he who sets up ethics for other people, but in such a way that people actually listen. What's your story, sir?
So it goes back a long, long time ago, and I'd say that jokingly, but actually when the story started, I think it was Don McLean that was singing a long, long time ago. I can still remember. And for those that are old enough to know who Don McLean is in American Pie, this will make perfect sense to you. But it was back in the 80s. I was tax partner in a CPA firm. I had, testified before Congress on various aspects of federal tax law, written articles in a number of magazines, taught continuing education courses in 30 states. Most anybody that would be in that arena would say, that's clearly success and on a positive trajectory. But the problem was, in my late 20s, I also was, Marguerite, how would I put this? Overextended and underfunded, or I had too much debt.
We've been there, all of us.
Yeah, well, in January of 1987, I'll never forget this. My local banker called and he said, is there a problem? It looks like you're 2 months behind in your house payment. Now, let me be crystal clear in the way I put this. The truth is I was 2 months behind in my house payment. But at the moment that he said that, there was this mental shift. It's the fight or flight syndrome. It's the movement from your frontal cortex to your amygdala where you have the fight or flight sense. And I thought to myself very quickly, oh my gosh, if I tell him I'm 2 months behind in my house payment, then the possibility is he'll recognize that I can't manage my own financial affairs. And if I can't manage my own financial affairs, he probably won't continue to send me business. And he is probably the best referral source that I've got. Oh my gosh, I can't tell him the truth. So I threw him off track and realized at that moment, oh my gosh, I've got a problem. And I've got to figure out a way to solve it. Now, because of the time frame that we've got, I'm going to shorten this a lot and say that even though I could have told the truth at that moment, I didn't. And in order to solve the problem, i.e. to pay the house payment, in order to solve the problem, what I ended up doing was embezzling money from a client's trust fund. Now, let me be really clear about this. That was a stupid thing to do. But a lot of human beings make stupid choices.
We all make stupid choices.
We all make stupid choices, and they will tend to fall into a pattern. There's a need. Well, I had a need for money. I needed to pay the house payment that I was behind on. So need starts it. There's an opportunity. Where was I going to get the money without telling the banker the truth? And I saw this easy place to quickly grab onto some money for a short period of time. But here's the weird part about this. The weird part about it is I would not naturally, nor would anybody listening to the show, would go out and say, well, I'm just going to go steal some money to solve this problem because you couldn't sleep at night. We have to rationalize our behavior. And I rationalized it saying, well, I'm really just borrowing it because I'm going to pay it back. And I did. I stole the money, but I paid it back. And somewhere in that process, in my mind, what I concluded was that, well, it really wasn't theft. It really was borrowing. Now, all of that said, for 3 years, I thought I had my own private little bank, which, by the way, I did not, but that's what I thought, because I convinced myself of it, because the mind is a wonderful thing. We can convince ourselves of stuff that is really crazy and somehow conclude that it must be okay. And so over a 3-year period, I functionally created a Ponzi scheme. Not proud of it, but it's what happened. And every choice you make in life has a consequence. So if you do something stupid, there's going to be a very unpleasant consequence. And the unpleasant consequence for me was that came crashing down. And although I made restitution to the people that I stole money from, the federal government said, "Oh, gee, Chuck, that's not quite enough." And the outcome of that was I, on October 2nd, 1995, took 23 steps into federal prison and became 11-642-058, an inmate. Or you have a guest on your show today that's a convicted felon.
Wow.
Well, welcome.
Gee, thank you.
That's a heck of a story, Chuck. Unbelievable.
It is. Why did they catch you? What happened? And please tell the audience who may not know, what is a Ponzi scheme?
Okay, so a Ponzi scheme is the same thing Bernie Madoff created.
Yes.
Because everybody's familiar with Bernie Madoff. His was $65 billion, mine was $254,000. He dwarfs me in terms of size, but then again, he's got a 150-year prison sentence, and I had 18 months. So I'm thankful that mine wasn't longer. But, here's the thing. A Ponzi scheme is a fraud where I am taking money from one person, promising them an outcome or a return, whatever it happens to be, but promising something, and then taking money from another person to pay the first person. And
so taking from Peter to pay Paul, then.
Yeah, that's it. Absolutely. Robbing Peter to pay Paul. You've heard people say that. I remember my mother and grandparents said when they were writing checks, "You're robbing Peter to pay Paul." Well, that's the concept, except on a much larger scale.
And Peter doesn't know. You haven't disclosed to Peter that you're doing that. That's also key to this, right, Chuck?
That's absolutely correct. Right. That's correct. Peter doesn't know, and when Paul gets a little return that happens to be from Peter's money, he has no clue. So everybody is somewhat in the dark.
If you had asked these people with the money if you could borrow it, would they have lent it to you?
No, probably not. I mean, it was a nice guy.
But what kept you from asking other people for help? I mean, you're like a really easy guy to talk to. And we've met. You came to our chapter and talked. I've talked to you on the phone. Why were you so alone that you couldn't reach out to a friend for help?
The thing is, let's take it from a practical perspective. The first thing that ever happens when a person really steps out and starts making a bad choice is there is some need that seems so pressing that it feels like an emergency to solve, and they move past rational thinking. So again, I'm going to go back to when the banker called. We could sit here today and say, "Well, gosh, Chuck, I mean, why didn't you just talk to the banker?" Yeah, but here's the thing. Let me give you a different example.
Anyone who's been in a relationship knows about fooling ourselves. I mean,
there you go.
I mean, I don't think it's that big of a stretch for any of us to understand getting into a path that doesn't quite match reality and that we don't really think through down the road. I think everyone understands that.
That would be absolutely correct. And today we hear Me Too and, sexual harassment. And I had a gentleman ask me a question the other day. He says, "Well, at what point in time does actions of 30 years ago just not count because that's the way it used to be?" And the answer comes back to, it was never all right. Just because that's what people do doesn't make it right. Think about speeding. Everybody speeds. Get on the interstate and tell me you don't do 5 to 10 over. But if you get a ticket, you're going to pay the ticket. You can't go to the judge and say, "Hey, I was driving 9 miles over the speed limit. I need to be off because everybody does it, so therefore it doesn't count."
Right.
There's always a consequence.
Yeah. I was just, as you described, the sort of inner voices that rationalize out sort of go-to behavior, just this go-to place because you're under pressure to pay a bill and you're not rational. It's almost like there's this margin of what I think is right and wrong, and then above that, will I get caught or not? And there's like a differential there, isn't there, Chuck?
There absolutely is. It's just like kids today. When I say kids, now I'm referring to, teenagers.
Right.
I mean, the whole invention of Snapchat was the idea that I could send you something, and what our parents don't know won't hurt us. So if it disappears, it can't be found. And if it can't be found, it must be okay.
How did you get caught?
It collapsed. I had a client who I had stolen money from, who at an unexpected time said, oh my goodness, I've had a change of circumstances. I need my money as in tomorrow. And there was no way to quickly be able to replace it. Therefore, it collapsed on itself.
All right. So it collapsed. When did the law get involved?
Well, it collapsed at the end of 1990. I relinquished my license as a CPA. It was going to be taken, so there was no sense in fighting it. I relinquished that. Of course, I lost my job as a tax partner in the firm. My wife and I sold everything to make restitution. With the help of family and friends, we did. The local district attorney did not want to prosecute me. He said, you'd lost everything at this point in time, and you paid everybody back with interest, and, you probably suffered enough. But the federal government did, because they said, look, you have too much national notoriety. We cannot let you get by without having a consequence that's more significant than the consequence you've experienced. So by mid-1991, the federal government decided that they wanted to prosecute me for embezzlement from a client and for tax evasion for failing to pay tax on stolen money, which, by the way, never crossed my mind.
No, it wouldn't have on mine either. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Tax partner in a CPA firm, and I intimately know the tax law, but it never crossed my mind to report the income that I'd stolen because, see, in my mind, I didn't steal it. I borrowed it. And the mind is a tricky thing. The truth
it is.
And what your mind can tell you sometimes can be radically different.
So the thing that I find most magical is that you were riding high. You went down this path of not making a good choice. You fixed it, got caught anyway, went to jail. And now you're making such amazing use of this whole experience. You're changing businesses and entrepreneurs all over the world. Tell us how you made that switch from walking out with those 23 steps, a free man, to being this amazing business ethical consultant.
Well, it sounds really cool, but we need to keep in mind that's been a little over 20 years ago. So Let me play that out for you. When I first got out of prison, nobody wanted to hire a convicted felon. And by the way, today, nobody wants to hire a convicted felon. So step number one, find a job. How do you do that? Find something that most people are unwilling to do. I have people call me all the time that have, or have felony convictions. Well, I can't get a job. Well, do something that other people don't want to do. What did you do? I sold cemetery property door to door. I mean, Mom always said death and taxes. I screwed up taxes, so I figured I'd try death.
Your mama was smart.
She was a smart woman. She was a smart woman. But I sold cemetery property door to door. And here's the thing. This is probably the key factor for it all. It doesn't make any difference what the job is. Could have been a garbage man. Doesn't make a difference. Be the best at it. You've got to be so doggone good that people will absolutely say, oh my gosh, I couldn't do it without him. So when I decided I was going to sell cemetery property door to door, I knew I had to be the top salesperson, because it's easy to replace a marginal salesperson who's a convicted felon with someone else. It's hard to replace the top salesperson.
How'd you do that?
After a year.
Yeah, but how'd you become the best?
Sheer will. I mean,
sheer
look,
will.
I don't care what it is. Sheer will. I don't care what it is that you do. You can choose to be the best or you can be marginal. It is certainly a matter of choice. I knew everybody breathing eventually had to have a place to put their dead body. So I figured I'd just keep on asking until I succeeded selling more than the next closest person to me.
Wow.
Now,
that's amazing.
After a year or two, the company said, well, could you manage this location? Because you're the top selling guy. I said, yeah, I sure could. And it became a top performing location. And then they said, well, could you manage more locations like the states of South Carolina and Georgia? Well, most certainly, because I'm not going to turn down opportunities. I mean, I won't get it. And by a decade, now this is 10 years following prison, I was a senior VP of sales and marketing in a public company. And that's when people said, wait a minute, how can you be a senior VP in a public company and a convicted felon? And the answer is simple. Every choice has a consequence. So the 10 years preceding me going to prison, I made a set of dumb, stupid choices, and the consequence was prison. The 10 years following my release from prison, I decided that I better be the best, because there's always somebody that would try to be better. So I better be really good at what I do. And because I chose to do that every day when I got up and put my shoes on, then that meant that I became a senior VP in a public company. And that's when I began speaking, because I recognized now there's a story to tell that's backed up by something valuable. Every choice has a consequence. You can live bad choices and federal prison as consequence, or good choices and senior VP in a public company, and defy the odds that a convicted felon should never rise to some level like that in a public organization.
And it sounds like part of that narrative is that it's the same mechanics for either of those scenarios.
It absolutely is, which is the reason, I'm going to say this, the reason it irritates me when people are like on the ambulance. They're always whining about something. It's like, shut up. You can be a victim or a victor. Either one is your choice. So choose what you want. If you want to be a victim because you can suck energy from people and it feeds you, go for it. But if you want to be a victor, don't hide in the ambulance saying, well, nobody will give me a chance. Make your chance.
So if somebody listening, whether they're in the corporate world or they're entrepreneurs, what can they expect from you in a keynote or a training? Because I see a line here in your bio, which I love, that Chuck starts by setting the scene with his own story and ends by setting the stage for your organization's ethical success. That's beautiful. So what can people expect from a keynote and a training or a consultation?
So here's the thing. Most of the time, it's funny. I think it's funny. People are like, well, gosh, you must be busy because there's so much unethical stuff taking place. And it's like, well, no, I'm not as busy as I want to be. Why? Because people tend to think that they're ethical till they're not.
Yes.
So when I go into an organization, it is not boring. Let's talk about the rules and regulations and what, you're required to do. I'm not interested in that. That's not of interest to me. What I'm interested in is talking about the motivation behind what causes smart people to make dumb choices. What if in the organization we can identify the patterns that take place that will allow smart people to get off track? What if we can identify them and somewhere in that process interrupt that pattern so that we have a better chance of our most valuable asset, our employees, staying on the ethical path?
So what are the top 3 patterns that you see?
Okay, well, it's not so much the top 3 patterns, it's how the pattern integrates. The pattern will always start with need. There's always going to be a need. For example, before this interview, I had not had lunch. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I need to get lunch real quick before we start the interview. But I didn't have time to go to a nice place to get something really healthy. So, need, I needed lunch. I was kind of hungry and I didn't want my stomach to be growling. 2, opportunity. Gosh, what opportunity do I have that's fast? Fast food. 3, rationalization. Well, gosh, if I eat one quick burger, the world's not going to come to an end. No, it's not on my diet. But, after all, is it going to really cause me that much harm? No. Boom, fast food. Need, opportunity, rationalization. So the question in an organization is, you can't control a person's need, but you can control opportunity, and you can talk about rationalization. And the more you talk about what that sounds like, oh, well, everybody does it. I mean, this is just the way we've always done it here. And I mean, you can think of a gazillion rationalizations. Well, everybody goes the 5 to 10 over the speed limit, so you don't want to drive too slow. You'll be slowing down the flow of traffic. I mean, we rationalize things every day. But if we talk about what that sounds like, people tend to pay more attention to rationalization and realize that's taking them down a path that most of the time they really don't want to go, because the outcome could be nasty.
That is for sure. That's amazing. So in terms of your work, what is the percentage of people who actually listen to you and do what you're inspiring them to do?
Oh, that's funny. That's a great question, by the way. It really is. It's funny. About a third of the time, I'm asked to come in to speak because they have to have continuing education hours.
Yes.
So it's CPAs or it's attorneys. Right. It's a compliance thing. They've got to have the hours, and they need somebody to do it, and they've been bored stiff over the years, and they want something different. That's about a third of the time. Another third of the time, there's probably been something that happened within the organization that's not really cool, and they need to have somebody come in and remind everyone, we need to act ethically. Or they realize that if they bring someone in, then they can report to the media that we've taken action to stem the problems that we've had, and we're doing ethics training, et cetera. And then about a third of the time, they really care. And those are the good ones, because you know that they care enough about ethics within the organization that it's an important priority to them, and it's not being done just because it's a compliance issue.
Can you identify which individuals or group or in which third?
Most of the time, whenever you're talking with the client, at least in my end, most of the time when you're talking with the client, you get a pretty good idea. Yeah. There was a major multinational company that I had done some work for. They were very, very kind in bringing me in, and they cared. They truly cared about ethics. And I'll never forget, it was kind of funny. I was going to be talking to the president of the company, and I thought, oh, wow, this is cool. So I need to come up with some really good questions. And so I thought to myself, and so, when I met this gentleman, he and I spoke for a few minutes, and I said, by the way, let me ask you a quick question. I said, what's it like doing business in China? And he looked at me and he said, we don't do business in China. And I thought, oh my God, I have asked this question. I thought it was a really cool, pithy question, and I've screwed this up. But he was very nice. He said, but let me explain why. He said, because I understand the reason for the question. One would assume because of the size of our company, we would clearly be doing business in China. But he said, here's the thing. He said, in China, he said, in order to get the contracts and the permits for the type of business we do, it's pretty commonplace to have to pay people. And he said, two problems with that. Problem number one, it's a violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which means if we're paying people to get permits in order for us to do business, we're violating federal law. He said, that's one problem. But he said, here's the problem that bothers me most. He said, now think about this. I'm going to take an employee, send them to a foreign country, tell them we want them to do business legally, and know that we won't get the business unless we play by that country's rules, which means we have to be in violation of the law. Why would I put an employee in a position that the only way they can succeed is to act unethically and illegally? We don't do that. And that spoke volumes.
Wow, that does.
Oh, yeah.
I wish more corporations would think that way. I think that's wonderful.
It was one, and it made me feel good to know that I'm working with them, because this is the company that by their standards says we don't want to act unethically.
How important is that in terms of the top dogs in a company being ethical? How important is that for everyone from the bottom up being ethical?
Oh, see, that's the paramount issue, and the one that's sometimes hardest to address, because you'll get companies that will want their employees to act ethically, but you look at the senior management in the company and they're not choosing to. So, yes. The truth is what senior management does, beneath senior management is going to observe. Just ask your children. Yes. And I have to say this to you. It was kind of funny. I was on a show much like this not long ago, and the lady doing the interviewing, she's in, we're having this lovely conversation, and apparently she had a cell phone or something in the other room, and the cell phone rang, and you really could barely hear the thing. But I'm gathering by the sound of the voice, she had a 4 or 5 year old daughter. But in any event, cell phone rings, and 4 or 5 year olds love phones. They just love to answer phones. This is fun. So the little girl gets the telephone, and apparently somebody wanted to speak to mom. That's the lady doing the interview. So this little girl busts in the room, and she says, Mommy, hey, you've got a call. It's funny as all get out. And mama says, instinctively, she says, tell him I'm in the shower.
Oh, that's funny.
It starts to continue the interview. And I'm sitting there thinking,
there you go.
Just taught your daughter to lie when it's expedient.
That's right.
Wow.
And yet all the statistics say we lie all the time, all throughout the day, either to ourselves and others. That's interesting. Yes. So what can we do if we want to run an ethical organization and an ethical life personally and professionally. Give us some tips. How do we manage that in this world where it's easy to have need and opportunity?
So the question becomes maybe twofold. How do you do that? Well, part of it is thinking about what you're doing. Why am I doing what I'm doing? What is it that motivates the behavior that I have? If I think about it, which now that assumes something, which I didn't do when mine collapsed, but thinking about it means we're actually using our rational brain. So if I'm aware that there are three primary factors that cause people to quit thinking about it or using their rational brain, one trigger would be financial. The recession of 2008, 9, 10, 11, whatever, is one of those times. Oh my gosh, lost a job, whatever the circumstance is, I'm under pressure. Okay. We think about pressure-filled things. Financial, relationship can be a pressure-filled experience, or health. But anything that really causes undue pressure needs to at least recognize this is a trigger. And what am I saying? What is my external and internal dialogue? Because I need to think about that dialogue, because if I understand it better, there's a better chance I'm probably not going to make that choice. Let me give you a perfect example of this, and it's a real simple example. We're both members of the National Speakers Association.
Yes.
Now, I think most speakers understand what our rules and regulations are and what the ethics requirements are. But most recently, we had some clarification on what does it mean to be a good member of the National Speakers Association and act collegially with each other. And when you start to talk about it,
yes,
when you actually put it on the table and you carry on a conversation, you have raised the elevation from subconscious to conscious. And when you do that, you can never go back to subconscious. If I'm aware of something and it's gone from my subconscious to my conscious behavior, I can never put it back in the subconscious and say, I didn't know anything about it. It never crossed my mind, because you brought it to consciousness. There's a great book by an author by the name of Dan Ariely, Predictably Irrational. And one of the things that he says in the book is the more you talk about something, the more people are going to act in a positive way. And this is not a religious thing. It's just an example from his book. He said the more people talk about the 10 Commandments, as an example, the more people live by the 10 Commandments, because they brought it from subconscious to conscious. The same would be true in ethical behavior.
So let me get your wisdom on this matter. So what you said was very meaningful. So let's say that in the speaker world, we have these amazing conversations that raise certain sensitive issues about how we treat each other, financial issues, sexual harassment, whatever it happens to be, from the subconscious to the conscious level. Are you suggesting then that that is some sort of booster shot for ethics, and that we can never go back to thinking certain things are okay if they're properly identified?
Okay, so let me answer that question this way. It's a booster shot, okay? Or maybe a better way of putting it, for me, I hate shots, by the way. But let's say it's a flu shot. Yeah, I don't know. Okay. I got stuck too many times as a kid with a needle. But, maybe it's a flu shot. You can take the flu shot to help prevent it, but it doesn't mean you won't get it. So here's a perfect example of a circumstance which I think it illustrates it in a lovely way. This past week, I was doing a program. I've got a program called Be the Difference, and it deals with recognizing and preventing sexual harassment in the workplace. And so I'm talking with someone a day or two before the program, and this young lady said to me, she said, I heard a speaker out there addressing an audience, and, large audience, probably 50, 60% female, but address the audience and on a routine basis said, okay, now you guys, do you get this or something? I don't know what the terminology would be, but she said 22 times he said, you guys, generically, just you guys. And so after the program, she came up and she said to this guy, she said, do you mind if I give you some constructive criticism? He says, no, what is it? She said, you said 22 times in your presentation, you guys. She said, yet 60% of the audience was female. So let me ask you a question. Just want you to think about it. How would you feel if you were in a meeting and 60% of the audience was male, but you had a female presenter who said, okay, ladies, and did that 22 times? What would you think when you walked out? And it was like this moment. And he was like, I probably would think, well, what's the deal with that? She said, so as a female, I have to ask you the question, are you in fact inclusive? I know you're not intending not to be, but are you inclusive by saying you guys? Okay, so here's the point to that. I thought to myself, my gosh, I say you guys. So it hit me. I don't want to be uninclusive, but it never crossed my mind saying you guys was going to be anything that potentially could be offensive. But then the way she put it made perfect sense. So I'm in this presentation this past week, and twice I said you guys, and I would catch myself and call myself on it. So does it mean we won't do it? No, we still will, because we have to break the habit. But I can't ever go back and put you guys into subconscious and say it and not remember what she said.
I think that's fair enough. So I think that everyone needs to talk to you, is my thinking. So what kind of keynotes and trainings do you want? Speak to the audience. Who needs to call you right here, right now?
Well, I love that. Number one, if you've got a program where you feel like it's valuable to support the best asset you have, your employees, by helping them understand the value of making the right choices the first time, then I'm the person that needs to address your group. Now, I speak to corporate audiences, I speak to governmental audiences, I speak to associations, and I'm thrilled to be able to carry that message out. But the thing that I have found is, although you and I, and you referred to me as an ethicist at the beginning, although I speak a lot about ethical behavior, I generally will say I talk about choices and consequences. Because I lived 10 years of poor choices, and the consequence that followed really was unpleasant. But I've also lived now 20-some years of a different set of choices. And even though I am legally defined as a convicted felon, I am not limited by that, because every choice we make in life has a consequence. What if my program will help people recognize that they have the power to create the outcomes they want by the choices they make today?
I think that would be the greatest thing in the world. We need more of that. So your family must be so proud of you. How do they feel about all this amazing stuff you've done?
Look, families are families. You know, they look and they say, you sure do travel a lot. Do you like that travel? You know, don't you ever get tired of it? I mean, it's funny, you know, they don't look at it as anything particularly amazing. I'm just like you. You know, we do our thing. I just happen to have had an interesting life experience. I'll be the first to admit, you know, some of the people ask me, well, if you had it to do over again, would you do it? Well, no, that was a stupid thing. I would not do that. But I will say, prison was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it actually helped me evaluate for myself, what does it really mean to be Chuck Gallagher?
Oh, good.
And if you have a challenge in life, what is it that we can do with that challenge that is going to make, how can we, let's better ask, how can we use our experiences in life to somehow help and enrich other people?
So that's a great talk in terms of from here forward. What if there's someone, well, not what if, there is someone now listening to you who's done something really wrong? What advice do you give them now before they get caught? What do they need to do to fix it?
Well, here's the thing. Sometimes it can't be fixed. Fix it assumes, and I'm not sure you're making this assumption, but fix it in many people's minds assumes that, oh my God, I'll never have the consequence. Let me just go ahead and somehow fix it. We all have to experience our consequences. The one thing I would say, and this was said to me many years ago, and it actually saved my life. The night this all collapsed, I considered suicide. I was in Boise, Idaho. There was no one around. Family had no idea that the next day I had to come home and admit I was a liar and a thief. And I considered, ending my life. But I'm chicken when it comes to pain.
Good.
So I began calling psychologists, psychiatrists, whatever, proctologists. I didn't care, just somebody. And And I got this one guy on the telephone. He wasn't anticipating my call, but, fortunately he was there. And he made a comment to me that stuck with me, and it has stuck with me all my life. And it's basically said this. He said, son, he says, you've made a terrible mistake, but you are not a mistake.
Oh. Do you remember the guy's name?
Have no clue who it was.
Oh.
He has no idea about me. I have no idea about him. It was just one of those serendipitous moments. Son, you've made a terrible mistake, but you are not a mistake. And then he said, the choice you make tonight will define the life you live in the future and the legacy you leave for your two sons. Make those choices wisely. So if someone is listening and they have made a mistake, and maybe they're living that mistake right now, realize anybody is capable of making a mistake. That doesn't mean they are a mistake. So there's a huge distinction, and anybody can move past the mistakes they make. Yes, there are consequences. Sometimes they're not pleasant, and we have to experience them and go through them. But you can choose from that. Are you going to be a victim of it or a victor from it? And
That's
that is
amazing.
Anyone's choice.
Well, I think that we have gotten so much from you, and the audience, I'm sure, is grateful. What are some final words of wisdom, sir?
Final words of wisdom.
Yes.
Probably the best is, let's think about what we actually put in our minds or say, and be willing to consider the possibility that we need to talk about it and raise the elevation and discussion. One of the things that I'll say, there are a lot of people today that talk about the Me Too movement, and they are politically charged on one side or the other. But here's the thing that strikes me. That conversation today in 2018 is raising the level of discussion amongst men and women and helping people see past what has been acceptable perhaps or okay in the past, and recognizing that that's not cool. And there's an opening. Well, it's not opening. It's toward the first part of the movie Forrest Gump. I love that movie. Yeah, that's such an educational movie. but there was a place in there where little Forrest he's a little bit on the slow side, and Mama's going in and she's talking with the principal. You'll probably remember the scene.
Yes.
And he's wanting to put Forrest in a special school, and she says, "Surely there is something we can do." And he said, "Is there a Mr. Gump, Mrs. Gump?" And Sally Field looks up and she says, "He's on vacation." And the next thing you see is Forrest sitting outside, and well, a lot of noises from the bedroom, and he comes out wiping his brow, and he looks at little Forrest and he says, "Son, your mama sure does want you to have an education." Now, I watched that, and it was funny in the movie, when Forrest starts grunting afterwards and so forth. I mean, people laughed, and there's a lot of Forrest Gump that's funny. But it occurred to me that I was adopted at birth, placed in the hands of two loving parents who could not have loved me more. But my dad died when I was 2. It wasn't anticipated. He had diabetic complications and passed away. And so Mom became a single parent. She became a widow and a single parent in one fell swoop. And it caused me to think about, in the early 60s, what did she have to do to make sure that I was properly educated? Now, I don't know that she had to do what Mrs. Gump had to do, but I don't know that she didn't, because the world was different in the 60s. So maybe today, by raising the conversation, maybe by talking about the ethics of our actions, maybe we can create an environment so that our grandchildren don't have to hold up a sign that says, "Me Too."
I hope you're right. I hope Me Too begins to be a movement of respect, that I'm respecting everybody and being inclusive.
Absolutely.
See if we can make that turn around. Well, Chuck Gallagher, CSB, it's been such a joy. I can't wait to have you back on.
Thank you.
You'll come back, won't you?
I absolutely will. Yeah, we can find plenty of things in the news media to talk about. There's plenty of opportunities to talk about ethical lapses. There's no doubt about that.
I suspect there'll never be a shortage. Well, thank you and for starting this conversation with us, and I hope it never ends.
Thanks so much, Chuck.
Absolutely.
You take care. Thank you.
The website, www.chuckgallagher.com, for those listening, and they can hear all about the work you're doing. Chuck, thanks for everything you do.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Step Up with Dr. Margarita Gurry. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and visit redshoeinstitute.com for more information about Dr. Margarita Gurry and the work she does.